You can now get 2 free audiobook downloads and a 30-day free trial at audible.bogosity.tv. Your choice from the world's largest selection of over 180,000 digital audiobooks and spoken word content for your iOS or Android device, Kindle, or MP3 player. Go to audible.bogosity.tv now. Welcome to the Bogosity Podcast for the week of May 6, 2018, the podcast that grabs it with both hands and makes a stash. This is your host, Shane Killian, and returning this week is Chris Hangartner. Welcome back, Chris.
Hello there.
Let's unfluviate the news of the bogus. The Environmental Working Group is an environmentalist organization dedicated to scaring Americans about things that are perfectly safe, like cell phone radiation.
Then again, most environmental groups are like that.
Well, they have what they call the Dirty Dozen, a list of foods that will absolutely kill you and cause you to grow a third arm and live the rest of your life as a disfigured mutant unless you eat the pricey organic version.
Oh yeah, I understand why people avoid processed food, but this idea that processed food is slowly killing us, it's like, I'm not seeing the bodies, people.
Well, they're not even talking about processed food, they're talking about produce.
Yeah.
Now understand, the EWG is not a testing organization. They don't even seem to have anyone with a scientific background in any relevant science. What they do is take numbers from USDA tests, which monitor the safety of chemicals used on farms, and these tests overwhelmingly show that the food is safe, but they ignore the fact that the dose makes the poison, and so they take chemicals that are in our foods in a matter of parts per billion, several orders of magnitude below known safe consumption levels, and just extrapolate from that and pretend that everyone's getting a toxic dose.
It's pretty funny, they're always afraid of those toxins, completely ignoring that most plants and fruits have natural toxins in them. Many fruits and nuts naturally contain cyanide in them.
Well, there was this one pesticide that they're so happy that they got it banned because supposedly it's killing off the bee colonies. It's not, but they were saying, oh, and this is what happens when you use, unnatural, stuff from a lab, and it was actually a natural one that they extracted from a plant.
Yeah.
And we're getting really good at detecting like these extremely tiny levels next to nothing. And groups like EWG use that to scare people, But I mean, if they did a test on your body right now, they'd find things like arsenic and cyanide and stuff like that. And something else they're doing is looking at the levels as they exist on farms, not the levels that are on the grocery store counter, which are much lower.
Yeah, contrary to what you see a lot on TV and movies, it's actually not really safe to pick a plant, off the root and immediately start eating it.
Actually, it pretty much is. That was one of the things they were saying here, is that a lot of the farmers and food scientists will let their kids just pull a strawberry off the plant and eat it. You have the higher levels, but even those higher levels really aren't harmful. And something else they do is pretend that chemicals are being combined when they aren't. Like one farm uses chemical A on strawberries, another farm uses chemical B, a third farm uses chemical C. So they tell you you're getting all of these chemicals, A, B, and C, every time you eat a strawberry. In fact, strawberries are number 1 on the list, which is actually one of the most nutritious things you can eat, believe it or not. They're incredibly nutritious.
Yeah.
They make a big deal about acai berries, that they're this superfood. Strawberries are a lot more nutritious than acai berries.
Yeah, I saw a list by Matthew Santoro, and it was all these health foods that people claimed were healthy, but it turns out they're not. One food I'm surprised he didn't put on that list: soy.
Yeah.
Yeah, Indians especially love to view soy as like the miracle food, but it turns out there's a lot of stuff in soy that they don't know about.
And I mean, that's a problem. They're discouraging people from eating nutritious fruits and vegetables. And I mean, most people they scare don't all of a sudden start going to Whole Foods and choose organic foods. They just go to the aisles to get the processed foods. And it's even worse for poor people who have enough trouble getting access to fresh fruits and vegetables and certainly can't afford those designer organics.
It's another thing I laugh so much when it comes to the whole organic versus non-organic is when organic site says that non-organic is controlled, by big agricultural industry, to which I'm like, oh yeah, because the organic food is not a big multi-million-dollar conglomerate itself.
Yeah, it totally is. And they put chemicals on organic produce that are way more toxic and in way bigger amounts than regular crops. I mean, it's still probably not harmful, but I mean, this idea that organic is safe and doesn't use any chemicals is a complete myth.
Look, here's the thing, people. If we didn't put chemicals in our food, the food would be less nutritious, it would be more likely to give you food poisoning, and would only last like a day or two, even in the fridge.
Yeah, I mean, what do you think, the natural bacteria and worms and other pests leave behind once they're done munching around? They leave behind a lot of nasty stuff.
Also reminds me of that one time when they thought about trying to reduce, the amount of food poisoning by bathing the food in radiation. Now, contrary to popular belief, it's not, like radiation. It's more like, stuff you'd find like in a minor X-ray and whatnot.
It's gamma radiation.
Yeah.
It's basic gamma radiation, yeah.
Yep, it's basic gamma radiation, unless you stand in a chamber and expose yourself to it for several days on end, you're not going to die, but they're all like, oh no, you're going to turn our food into frankenfoods and all
Once you turn it off, the radiation's no longer there.
Yeah.
And I mean, it wasn't even legal in this country until, 2011 or something?
Yeah.
And even then, it's taking a long time for people to start doing it because they don't want environmentalist groups like this to start going, radiation!
That's why, people always say, get your nutritional information from a scientist and not an activist group.
Hey, if you're tired of hearing all these promos, well, supporters got it early and without promos or ads. Just go to patreon.com or makersupport.com and support Shane DK at any level. Do you have children or nieces or nephews? Are you homeschooling or just want to counter some of the socialist indoctrination most children get in school? If so, go to bogosity.tv/TuttleTwins and you'll be taken to a website where you can get some great books for elementary age children. The Tuttle Twins books are books about liberty and free market economics that include children's versions of Bastiat's The Law, Leonard Read's I, Pencil, and Hayek's The Road to Serfdom, as well as books about the Federal Reserve and how regulations protect business cronies. They'll learn about the harm caused by eminent domain, or regulations passed in the name of safety, and fundamental concepts of liberty. And as you can see from the sample pages on the website, they're all easy to read and nicely illustrated. They're just $9.99 a piece, or get a special discount as well as free bonuses when you purchase all 5. You can even buy in bulk to donate to schools and local libraries. So get the Tuttle Twins books at bogosity.tv/TuttleTwins. So a few years ago, we talked about how statins were being overprescribed in Britain. They called it the statins capital of Europe. I think they should call it Staten Island, but that's just me. But anyway, we talked about the benefits of statins for high-risk people in conjunction with lifestyle changes, but we never really followed up on that and took a good look at the issue of statins and how good they are and who should take them and who shouldn't. Well, now there's a meta-analysis that sheds a lot of light on who can benefit from statins. And what we're actually talking about are HMG-CoA reductase inhibitors. They're medications to lower lipid levels in the blood. The idea is that if you have high levels of LDL cholesterol, statins can greatly reduce your chance of cardiovascular disease.
Yeah, I actually saw this documentary in response to Super Size Me. It was called Fathead. You heard of it?
I haven't heard of it, no.
Oh, it's a good one. It actually kind of talks about statins. Now, granted, it's more negative towards statins, but it's a good because he really covers a lot of, stuff about cardiovascular health, and it turns out there's a lot of myths about heart disease that people think of. Like, his personal favorite myth is that if you have high cholesterol, you have a high risk of heart disease, which the truth is, he actually had doctors saying this. Heart disease isn't always really determined by your cholesterol. It's more complicated than that.
But, I mean, the LDL is a big indicator, and this meta-analysis published in JAMA is really good at taking a look at what we know about treatment with statins and its benefits, and it focuses primarily on the baseline LDL levels and the effectiveness of statins. And like you said, there's a lot of other stuff going on, too. There's things like particle size and all that, but they were just focusing on LDL. And so they found, quote, in this meta-analysis of 34 randomized clinical trials that included 270,288 participants, more intensive LDL-C lowering therapy was associated with a progressive reduction in total mortality with higher baseline LDL-C levels, rate ratio 0.91 for each 40 milligrams per deciliter increase in baseline level. However, this relationship was not present with baseline LDL-C levels less than 100 milligrams per deciliter. There was a similar relationship for cardiovascular mortality. Okay, let me translate. What we're talking about here is a dose-response effect. So if you're given a dose of something, what's the body's response to that, and what's the body's response at a lower dose versus a higher dose, etc. In this case, we actually have two dose-response effects. The first is that higher doses of statins were more effective than lower doses, which actually serves to show that, yes, it is the statins doing it and not some other effect. The second is that statins were more effective in patients with an LDL greater than 100 than in patients with LDL of less than 100. So this confirms both the LDL hypothesis that LDL cholesterol itself raises the risk of CVD, and it also confirms that statins lower LDL cholesterol and greatly reduce the risk of heart disease, stroke, and mortality. And it's still the case that you should consider lifestyle changes, maintain a lean body mass, get regular exercise, and don't smoke.
Actually, Fathead mentioned this is that another thing you should always do if you're concerned about heart disease is have your heart checked out to search for tears or signs of inflammation, because that's what really causes LDL to build up and causing heart attacks.
Oh, sure. And I mean, there's, any doctor will tell you that pretty much with any condition like that or any risk, you want to try to attack it from multiple different directions.
That's actually why we have LDL, because if something happens to your heart, the job is to take it in there and use the cholesterol to help fix it. But if there's something wrong with your heart, like whether it's damaged or there's inflammation, instead of fixing the heart, it just builds up, and then you got cardiovascular disease.
Yeah, I think what they're looking for, if I remember correctly, is something like an LDL between 30 and 60. So you wouldn't want it to drop below, I think, 30. At least too far below that either. But, it's about having the right level. It's not like LDL is bad and we need to get rid of all of it. But as far as the lifestyle changes are concerned, the problem isn't that they don't work. It's trying to get people to do it and stay on it. And just a lot of people, let's face it, aren't going to do that. And so statins should not be seen as a substitute for lifestyle changes, but something to do along with them. And that way, if the person is successful at doing the lifestyle changes and keeping their LDL below 100, you can always stop the statin treatment later, but in the meantime, the patient is being helped by the statins. And also consider things like risk factors, patient history, family history, and also a lot of this is very individualized. I mean, you could have someone who just sits around eating potato chips all day and has the low LDL levels. Other people might still maintain a high LDL level even after getting in this good diet exercise regime and staying on it. So, and the consensus is still not to give statins to everyone, but this study shows that there's a good criteria. Give them to people whose LDL levels are over 100.
But don't subsidize it like the UK government does, because then that messes up everything.
Well, I mean, they're just being like Oprah. You get a statin, you get a statin, everyone gets a statin. Don't hand them out like candy. Don't put them in the drinking water. Don't give them to patients and ignore other treatment options, but statins can be very beneficial as part of a treatment regime when appropriate.
Yeah, I guess the statins are a treatment, but they're not a cure, so...
Right. They're a preventative, really. If you're on the Wi-Fi in a coffee shop or hotel, anyone on that network can get your traffic. Do you really trust all of those strangers? For that matter, do you really trust your ISP? A VPN can protect you from prying eyes, disguise your location, and even foil government censors. It's essential in this day and age, so go to vpn.bogosity.tv and you'll be taken to BoxPN. Starting at just $2.99 a month, you can get unlimited high-speed connections to VPN servers all over the world, and they don't log connections, so your privacy is assured. Traveling abroad, just VPN home, and don't worry about what those other governments are doing. Back at home, stop your ISP from traffic shaping and messing with the quality internet access you're paying good money for. You can connect from multiple machines at once, including your smartphone or tablet, and it supports all the secure standards, including OpenVPN and SSTP. Bypass censors and surveillance with your own secure VPN connection. Go to vpn.bogosity.tv. So we all know the problem with modern social media is that we all go into echo chambers, only being around like-minded people and not being exposed to other ideas. But like a lot of things that everybody knows, it's just wrong.
On a random subject, a lot of people have accused our group of being an echo chamber, to which I like to tell them, hey, we invite people from all sorts of stuff. the only reason why we don't have a lot of them is because it ends in one of two over and over that we thoroughly debunked and we're just like, we're not going to listen to them anymore, or they leave of their own volition.
I've tried to get some in here, and I know Daniel Wilcox has tried to get some ANCOMs in, and maybe even getting one as a co-host, but...
Yeah, some of the ANCOMs that have joined our Discord group, holy crap, they were just like... I remember this one particular pair, I can't remember their names, but I kept debunking their stuff over and over again, and they just come back saying, no, it doesn't work like that. No, it doesn't work like that. No, it doesn't work like that.
We are going to hold you to the methods of rationality. That's our criteria. One of the ideals of early netizens was tearing down social and cultural barriers between people, coming to a greater understanding of the world around us, but one thing that's happened in recent years is ever-increasing division as people choose up political teams where everyone on your team is good and wonderful, and everyone else are horrible, evil, fascist baby eaters.
Yeah.
Now, while it is true that people searching out news items, as a study of browsing history of 50,000 US-based users shows, tend to go to more polarized sources like Breitbart instead of Fox News, they're also more likely to visit sites expressing opposing viewpoints. According to the study's author Seth Flaxman, quote, "It seems counterintuitive, but direct browsing often just consists of one or two sites that you regularly read, such as the BBC or CNN, while by its nature, social media will expose you to a number of other sources, increasing the diversity." A Pew survey surrounding the 2016 presidential election agrees with his findings. A majority of people reported a range of opinions in their social media feeds. And Elizabeth Dubois at the University of Ottawa has come to a similar conclusion. In a study of 2,000 British adults, she found that a majority of people reach outside of their political comfort zone, actively seeking out sources that do not match with their preconceptions. In fact, just 8% of participants could be said to be at risk of living in an echo chamber. Now, I don't know, maybe they're allowed 8%, but...
Yeah, well, of course, you know how CNN and the BBC, if the news doesn't come from them, it's fake news.
Well, I mean, that's it. There's being exposed to it and there's being receptive to it. When people say, oh, that's just Fox News, that's just, right-wing, blah, 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 and they just dismiss it on that basis. But on the other hand, and as usual, efforts to counter the echo chamber and filter bubble actually make things worse, resulting in more political polarization. We live in a world where light bulbs connect to the internet, and recent attacks on them prove that your online security is under threat like never before. Not only your websites, but the internet-enabled devices you buy. And the biggest problem is weak passwords. That's why you need LastPass. LastPass allows you to randomly generate strong, unique passwords on the web and on your internet-enabled devices, all protected by one master password. LastPass sets up in minutes and gives you secure automatic logins throughout the web, synchronizing across all your browsers, all your computers, and even your mobile devices, at home, at work, or on the road. It even securely stores sensitive form data, including credit card numbers, backup sensitive documents, software licenses, Wi-Fi logins, and more. And with LastPass Premium, you can get these benefits on other applications, manage passwords for your entire family, and also get priority customer support. Sign up at password.bogosity.tv for a free month of LastPass Premium. Log in securely everywhere using the last password you'll ever have to remember. Go to password.bogosity.tv and get LastPass now. And now it's time to elongate this week's biggest Bogon emitter. And one of the things the gun control nutbars moan about is the fact that the CDC is no longer allowed to research information that could support gun control. Now, actually, this is a lie as usual. The law only says they cannot advocate for gun control, not that they can't research it. But I'm sure if they did, they'd totally find it, despite the fact that every single other organization ever finds data against it. And guess what? Every single other organization includes the CDC itself. Turns out, in the 1990s, the CDC studied it. They looked into one of the most important questions in the social science surrounding gun policy. How often do innocent citizens use guns in self-defense? They did the studies and promptly buried them.
You know, it's one thing that's so ironic, though, is that when we point this out, the guys are like, but if you're libertarians, then why are you using government sources? It's because the government knows these rules and policies don't work, but they do them anyway, just like with the foreign policy. The CIA has said multiple times in several secret memos, our interventionism is leading to extremism of these countries.
Well, and it's also very effective when you're trying to counter status. Oh, well, I don't, believe, Gary Kleck, who we'll talk about in a little bit. Well, okay, here's the CDC. You like the CDC? Here's what they say. And they inquired about defensive gun use, or DGU, in their Behavioral Risk Factor Surveillance System in 1996, 1997, and 1998, but never again since, and they never reported the results of these surveys. They don't even have anything on their website about the estimates of DGU frequency. They never even acknowledge that they even asked the question, but they do have the data. So in 1996, they surveyed 5,484 people about defensive gun use, in addition to a range of other health-related topics. Later years, the sample size were lower, but still in the thousands. The total sample size from all 3 years is 12,870. There is one problem. They only asked the question of defensive gun use to people who reported owning a gun in the household at the time of the interview, not the time period covered by the survey, so they were undercounting. But even so, the data they collected showed that guns are used defensively by victims over 3 times as often as they're used offensively by criminals. And these results are consistent with Gary Kleck. We mentioned him earlier. He's a criminologist at the University of Florida. He conducted a survey of almost 5,000 individuals about defensive gun use, and the gun control nut bars have been jumping all over themselves to deny it ever since. That survey found that guns are used defensively 2.5 million times a year in the U.S. The CDC's figure is 2.45 million.
Oh, yeah.
Now, in both of those, there is a big range of uncertainty, and if you look at the error bars, it ends up being somewhere between 500,000 and 3 million. But still, there's only like 300,000 violent crimes a year in this country. And meanwhile, the gun control fartwits still cling to the National Crime Victimization Survey, which deliberately lowballed the data. I mean, first of all, people might not exactly be willing to admit this to a government agent who's asking them the question, but even though they severely lowballed it, they still got a figure of 100,000 a year. But here's the thing. They only asked a tiny minority of those surveyed about whether or not they had used a gun defensively, even though they extrapolated it to the entire sample. And you don't get to do that. You only get to look at the ones you ask about it directly and extrapolate from there. And not only that, they only asked this question to people who said they were crime victims, when in a lot of cases, with DGUs, the crime is prevented entirely, meaning the person never becomes a victim to begin with. But the National Crime Victimization Survey assumed that if there was no victim, there wasn't even an attempt.
Actually, here's another good example, about crime victimization and how guns protect people. There was an incident in a Walmart during a Black Friday one time, and, there was a case where a customer pulled a gun on another customer. The internet was all full of people saying, oh, only in America, pull over guns to fight over a new toy and whatnot. What they didn't mention is because, and I actually looked that story up, yeah, the woman pulled the gun on another customer, but it wasn't because, she wanted something. It was because that customer was grabbing onto her daughter and pulling her hair and assaulting her.
And even that survey is better than the data Michael Shermer recently relied on, which required the criminal to become wounded by the defender.
Yeah.
Because that's what they were doing. They were looking at, let's look at gunshot wounds and how many of them were criminals shot by someone defending and how many of them were, but I mean, you're not counting the vast overwhelming majority. And I mean, all these other studies say that most of the time, all you have to do is show the person that you're armed and they run off.
Yeah, that's why I tell this to all those SJW feminists. Gaston Glock has done far more to protect women than you guys ever did. Because, look, I'm not trying to say women are weak or anything. There's some really strong women out there, but, the average woman, who's only like 150 or whatnot, I forgot the statistic, she doesn't have much of a chance against, a guy who's like 300 pounds of muscle and he bench presses several hundred pounds, just for a warm-up. She doesn't stand much of a chance against him. That's why she needs a gun or something like that.
Well, and it's like, there was this one politician that was saying something like, if you're a woman, you don't want an AR-15, just use a 12 gauge,
Joe Biden, yeah, he said that.
Yeah, and I mean, you look online at women firing 12 gauges and just being literally knocked over by them, Whereas they fire an AR-15 and it's just rat-a-tat-a-tat, and, they're just standing there and it's not a problem.
I've seen videos of, big hulking men, struggling to control, the recoil of a 12-gauge shotgun, especially if it's loaded with high-powered hunting slugs, it's...
Yeah, my dad taught me to shoot when I was 12 or something like that, and, I was a skinny kid, I was a beanpole, and that thing... Oh, man, I almost lost my footing. It was like, bam, and I was like, I think I'll stick to the 110.
That's why the AR-15 is a very popular rifle design, is because it has very low recoil, so you don't, hesitate between shots. It's very good.
Well, and that's another benefit of a suppressor, is it cuts down on all that as well. And
yeah, but...
You don't have as much recoil, and you can keep aim between shots. But when you have two independent surveys arriving at the same conclusion as you do with CLEX and the CDC's, it's time to pay attention, and we should have been paying attention for the last 20 years, but unfortunately we couldn't because the CDC never told anyone they had even asked the question. And so that has to make the CDC this week's biggest Bogon emitter. And now for the second time this year, a recipient of the only honor we give, the Silver Cluon Award, which we give to people who come up with a quick or clever or out-of-the-box way of debunking nonsense. And this time, it goes to YouTuber Royal Nonesuch, who makes videos about building and firing pipe guns from scratch. And we've covered many times how easy it is to make homemade firearms. His entire channel is a testament to this. Well, he hails from Columbia, Missouri, which recently did one of those gun buybacks. They offered $100 for each firearm surrendered. So guess what Nonesuch did? He took 3 of his homemade guns to the buyback and walked away with $300 in his pocket.
Yeah, that's awesome,
And according to Nonesuch, they were, quote, 3 of the crappiest guns I ever made, and one of which he said should never be fired again. By the way, you know what Nonesuch did with his $300?
What?
He bought a gun. And I'm also guessing that the total number of real criminals who participated in this buyback was a number very close to 0.
Yeah, that's the thing with gun control. It only affects law-abiding citizens.
So for totally making a joke of gun buybacks, Royal Nonesuch gets our second Silver Cluon for 2018. Enjoy it, Royal, and it might even make a good gun site. If you're going to shop online, use our special links to shop at Amazon. Clear your cookies and go to amazon.bogosity.tv, and you won't pay a penny more for your purchase. If you haven't used the mobile app in the last 12 months, or even at all, go to get5.bogosity.tv on your phone or tablet and get $5 off your order of $10 or more. Go to prime.bogosity.tv for a free 30-day trial of Amazon Prime and enjoy thousands of movies and TV episodes, borrow Kindle books, and get unlimited 2-day shipping for free. And speaking of Kindle, go to kindle.bogosity.tv for a 30-day free trial to Kindle Unlimited. Read over 1 million books and listen to thousands of audiobooks on any device. You can go to music.bogosity.tv and get a free 30-day trial of Amazon Music Unlimited with access to Amazon's entire library of 10 million songs, ad-free and with unlimited skips, and even download to listen offline. All great ways to help this podcast simply by shopping at Amazon. And now let's point and laugh at this week's
Idiot Extraordinaire.
And this week it goes to all the drug warriors and other busybodies trying to oppress pain sufferers with the bogus opioid scare, which we've covered quite a few times on this podcast, and I think you were here for one of those, Chris.
Oh, yeah.
Well, the problem, of course, is all of those horrible, evil doctors prescribing them, and if we just stop that, everything will be all better.
Yeah.
Except a report from the IQVIA Institute for Human Data Science, opioid prescriptions, which had been continually rising up to 2011, began falling at that time, and they fallen a total of 29% between 2011 and 2017. And guess what? That's the same time as opioid-related deaths began accelerating. They'd been rising steady up to that point, basically like a linear, but after that point, they started rising exponentially.
It actually reminds me of this funny thing that was making fun of it war, where it shows a senator banning opioids, and then he later reads, people are dying from black market opioids, and he's like, God damn it, how come every time us good well-intentioned politicians pass a law, the black market has to come around and ruin it?
But even when you take out heroin and fentanyl and just look at synthetic opioids, before 2011, they'd been rising maybe a tiny bit, but was fairly flat. They accelerated big time around the time prescription opioids were moved to Schedule 2. Gee, thanks, Barry. And Trump seems bent on continuing the same misguided policy.
Yes, there are people who are legitimately addicted to opioids, but addiction is a symptom of a much greater problem, and by banning the drug, you're only putting a bandage over one of the symptoms, and you're not treating the other problem, because even if the person who's addicted decides, I'm going to give up taking opioids, he's just going to substitute his addiction with something else.
Well, yeah, but in addition to sending them to the black market, and I mean, pain is a huge motivator in that regard, pretty much any psychiatrist or psychologist will tell you that if you're trying to figure out someone's risk for suicide, consider their pain levels.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and there have been people who have lost their opioids trying to deal with chronic pain. They haven't been able to deal with it without it, and they've committed suicide. Well, and the opioids don't get you out of pain completely. They just take it down to a level where you can just kind of muddle through the day. So what do drug warriors like all statists do when their policy is shown to be completely and utterly not working and even backfiring? Well, they double down, of course. We're obviously not doing enough.
Yep.
And the patient died because we didn't use enough leeches.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, what? The bailouts didn't save the money and many companies went out of business and stopped lending? Well, that's because we didn't give them enough money.
Yes, the DEA has reduced the number of prescription opioids that can be produced by 25% last year and another 20% this year, and they've announced plans to restrict it even further. And they claim that this is based on legitimate medical needs of patients, not the number of pills expected to sell, but the number expected to sell is based on the number of expected prescriptions, and that, in turn, is based on patients' legitimate medical needs.
Actually, that reminds me of that one guy who was in a similar situation that you had. That one time he was in a terrible car accident, only he was actually in a wheelchair because he was in so much pain and he was partially paralyzed, and the DEA raided his house, pointed guns at his children and all that, and arrested him, and they said, well, he had too many pills. We found over 40 or 50 pills, but then several doctors pointed out, that's about a basic week and a half's worth of prescription.
Yeah, I get them filled 90 at a time. But this is what government always does in both healthcare and the drug war. They substitute their own judgment in place of licensed and qualified medical professionals who have actually examined the patient in person. If anyone else did that, it would be practicing medicine without a license. But for government, it's all in a day's work.
And that's also a reason why healthcare is so expensive and why people are having difficulty finding doctors these days. It's because it's so freaking difficult to become one these days, And I actually read somewhere that, there was one medical student who said the worst part about going to medical school isn't, learning all the complicated disease terms and all that. It's actually taking the courses where they teach you just how to deal with government regulation and how to protect yourself from legal trouble.
Well, ask anyone who's on Medicare or Medicaid how difficult it is to find someone who can treat them for something.
That's why I don't believe for a single second that you say we only care about the rights of the patient, because you don't.
So all of that makes the DEA and other drug warriors this week's
Idiot Extraordinaire.
Well, that wraps up this With Feeling edition of the Bogosity Podcast. Come join the discussion at forum.bogosity.tv or discord.bogosity.tv, and feel free to send a question, statement, news article, or rant in text or audio to podcast@bogosity.tv. This podcast depends on you to keep going, so please donate using the links on the website or the QR codes in the thumbnail, or support Shane DK on Patreon or Maker Support to get the podcast and YouTube videos early and without ads or promos. Thank you for listening, and thanks to Chris Hangartner for joining me.
Good to be back.
Until next time, here's a quote from Eliezer Yudkowsky. People go funny in the head when talking about politics. When today you get into an argument about whether we ought to raise the minimum wage, you're executing adaptations for an ancestral environment where being on the wrong side of the argument could get you killed. The Bogosity Podcast is licensed under Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial No Derivatives 4.0 International License.
Bogosity.
Want answers to creationist claims against evolution? Would you like to know more about evolution yourself, or even engage creationists more directly, with actual peer-reviewed sources to back you up? My book, How Evolution is Scientific, is designed to show the basics of evolutionary theory and how it is so well supported using the scientific method. It's impeccably sourced, with references to the actual scientific material, and is arranged using the creationists' own criteria of what is scientific. Using their own arguments against them, see how evolution is scientific, but creationism is not, based on observations, accurate predictions, logic, and evidence. Get answers to common creationist claims, and even a primer on abiogenesis, the start of all life. It's all in my book, How Evolution is Scientific, available at Amazon and on Kindle, EPUB, and PDF as well. Get How Evolution is Scientific and never be taken in by creationists again.
And meanwhile, the poor infant died a painful death because the UK government wouldn't let his parents take him to the United States for mitochondrial treatment.
Yeah, Alfie, I forget his last name, but just like Charlie Gard before him.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, Italy even made him an Italian citizen and saying, okay, we're going to take him to Italy, and they still wouldn't let go of him.
Yep, he's gotta die with dignity.
I swear, every time I hear someone use the phrase die with dignity, I want to go nap violation all over them.
It kind of reminds me of Bob Marley, because when they first discovered the skin cancer, it was actually very small, and they flat out told him, oh yeah, we can easily surgically remove it. I can't, I'm Rastafarian, and Rastafarians say that the body has to be whole, so if you perform the surgery, that would be violating my religion.
I was just thinking more along the lines of Dylan Thomas, do not go gentle into that good night, rage, rage against the dying of the light. I love that poem.
It's so stupid how governments treat it. Like, I remember watching a video from the New York Times, and it was talking about the old case with that one doctor who painlessly, euthanized people with their consent, because they had terminal illnesses and all that.
Jack Kevorkian.
And they say, well, we only want what's right for the patient. And I'm just thinking, oh, what's right for the patient? So if you can't euthanize yourself, can you at least get experimental, drugs to maybe ease your suffering and maybe even prolong your life? Well, no, you can't because we didn't approve of it.
Yeah. In the second and later editions of Mary Ruart's Healing Our World, there's an appendix there with her talking about her sister's experience with Dr. Jack Kevorkian and her end of life that way, and it's really good. It's really heartwarming.
But I think you and me have told this to a lot of people. Every time the FDA says, we just approved a drug and it's going to save 10,000 people a year, that means 10,000 people last year died waiting for them to get off their butts. Also, the Southern Poverty Law Center is guilty of this too, because it's like they always talk about how there's all these, racist websites, and you look them up and it's like, the overwhelming majority of these websites aren't racist.
Yeah, that's basically their MO. They're kind of trading on this undeserved reputation to say, look, here are some people we don't like politically, so we're going to use the SPLC to call them racist.
Racism, it's just another way of calling someone a fascist or a Nazi. It should have its own internet law.